Marcus Chen had learned to make himself invisible. At 15 years old, he had mastered the art of walking through the crowded hallways of Lincoln High School without making eye contact, without drawing attention, without existing in any way that mattered to the kids who ruled these halls. His backpack was held together with duct tape, his jeans were 2 inches too short, and his left sneaker had a sole that flapped with every step, creating a sound that announces poverty to anyone within earshot. That morning, as he walked toward his locker, he could hear the whispers starting before he even turned the corner. "There goes the charity case," someone muttered loud enough for him to hear. Marcus kept his eyes down and continued walking, his worn-out shoe slapping against the polished floor like a metronome counting down to something terrible. He had been attending Lincoln High for exactly 8 months, ever since his mother had gotten a cleaning job at the medical center and they had moved from the south side into this affluent district. 8 months of being the poor kid in a school where teenagers drove cars that cost more than his mother made in 3 years. The morning bell was still 10 minutes away when Marcus reached his locker. He worked the combination lock with practiced fingers, hoping to grab his books and disappear into the library before the real trouble started. But hope was a luxury he could rarely afford. As his locker door swung open, 3 shadows fell across the metal frame. Marcus didn't need to turn around to know who they were. Trevor Blackwood stood directly behind him, flanked by his 2 constant companions, Brad and Connor. Trevor was the son of a real estate mogul, a fact he mentioned at least once in every conversation. He wore a jacket that probably cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe, and his smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. "Hey, poverty shoes," Trevor said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "I heard that flapping sound all the way from the parking lot. What happened? Did you forget to check the dumpster for better ones?" Brad and Connor laughed on cue, like trained dog performing for treats. Marcus pulled his chemistry textbook from the locker and tried to close the door, but Trevor's hand shot out and held it open. The older boy leaned in close enough that Marcus could smell the expensive cologne he wore, the kind advertised in magazines that Marcus's family couldn't afford to buy. "I'm talking to you," Trevor said, his voice hardening. "When someone speaks to you, the polite thing to do is respond. Didn't your mother teach you manners, or was she too busy scrubbing toilets?" The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His mother worked 60 hours a week at 2 jobs to keep them in their tiny apartment, to put food on the table, to give him a chance at a better life. She came home with her hands raw from chemicals and her back aching from bending over hospital floors, and she never complained. She was the strongest person Marcus knew, and hearing her mocked by someone who had never worked a day in his life ignited something dangerous in his chest. Marcus turned to face Trevor, and for just a moment, he forgot about being invisible. "Leave me alone," he said quietly. The hallway around them had grown silent. Other students had stopped to watch, sensing that something was about to happen. Trevor's smile widened, revealing perfectly straight teeth that had probably been perfected by expensive orthodontic work. He reached out and shoved Marcus backward against the lockers. The metal crashed against Marcus's spine, sending a jolt of pain through his body. "Oh, what?" Trevor challenged. "What are you going to do about it? Charity case." Marcus knew he should walk away. He knew that fighting back would only make things worse. But as Trevor raised his hand again, something inside Marcus finally broke. He dropped his textbook and clenched his fists, ready to accept whatever consequences came next. The crowd around him pressed closer, smartphones already recording, hungry for violence. This was it. This was the moment when Marcus Chen would stop being invisible. But before anyone could throw a punch, before the situation could explode into something irreversible, a deep voice cut through the tension like a knife through silk. "That's enough." Everyone in the hallway turned toward the voice. Standing at the far end of the corridor, near the main entrance, was a man who seemed completely out of place in a high school. He was maybe in his late 50s, dressed in simple jeans and a dark jacket, but there was something about the way he carried himself that commanded immediate attention. His face was weathered and serious, his eyes sharp and calculating, like someone who had seen real trouble and knew exactly how to handle it. He walked toward the group with measured steps, each footfall deliberate and purposeful. Marcus recognized him immediately. Everyone in the world would recognize him. Jason Statham, the action star, the fighter, the man who played heroes on movie screens and made it look effortless. But what was he doing here, In Lincoln High School, walking toward a confrontation between a bully and his victim like it was the most natural thing in the world. Trevor seemed frozen, his hands still raised, his expression shifting from aggressive confidence to confusion. The students with their phones kept recording, but now they were capturing something entirely different than a fight. They were documenting the moment when Jason Statham interrupted a bullying incident in their school hallway. The actor stopped about 5 feet away from the group, his gaze moving from Trevor to Marcus and back again. When he spoke, his British accent was unmistakable, his tone calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel that suggested he wouldn't tolerate any nonsense. "I said that's enough," Statham repeated, looking directly at Trevor. "Drop your hand and step back." Trevor's arm slowly lowered to his side. For all his bravado, for all his bullying and intimidation, he was still just a teenager facing down someone who radiated real authority. Brad and Connor had already taken several steps backward, creating distance between themselves and their leader. The crowd of students whispered among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. Marcus remained pressed against the lockers, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Was this really happening? Had Jason Statham actually just offended him? Trevor started to say, but Statham raised one finger and the boy fell silent immediately. The actor took another step forward, and despite the fact that Trevor was nearly 6 feet tall, he suddenly looked very small. Statham's presence filled the hallway, not through aggression or threats, but through sheer force of character. This was a man who had trained with real fighters, who had learned discipline and control, who understood the difference between strength and violence. When he finally spoke again, his words were quiet but crystal clear. "You were just what? Having a bit of fun? Teaching someone a lesson? Making yourself feel big by making someone else feel small." Statham shook his head slowly, disappointment evident in his expression. "I've met bullies on 3 continents. Mate. Some of them were professional fighters. Some of them were criminals. Some of them wore expensive suits and called themselves businessmen. But they all had one thing in common. They all picked on people they thought couldn't fight back. They all thought power meant making others afraid." He turned his attention to Marcus, and for the first time since the confrontation began, there was warmth in his eyes. "You all right, son?" Marcus managed to nod, though he wasn't sure if he could trust his voice. Statham bent down and picked up the chemistry textbook that Marcus had dropped, dusting it off before handing it back. As he did, Marcus noticed something that made his breath catch. The actor's knuckles were scarred and slightly crooked, the hands of someone who had actually thrown real punches, not just movie ones. These weren't the soft hands of someone who had lived a life of luxury and privilege. These were working hands, hands that understood struggle. "Listen to me, all of you," Statham said, addressing not just Trevor but the entire crowd that had gathered. His voice carried down the hallway, reaching students who were craning their necks to see what was happening. "I grew up poor. My father was a street seller. We didn't have money for fancy things. I got bullied too, back in the day. I know what it feels like to walk into a room and have people judge you for things you can't control, for circumstances you didn't choose. And I'm here to tell you that the kids doing the bullying, they're not the strong ones. They're the weak ones. They're the cowards." Trevor's face had turned red, whether from embarrassment or anger, Marcus couldn't tell. Several students in the crowd were nodding, some looking ashamed, others seeming to see the situation differently now that someone with real authority had called it out. "Now here's what's going to happen," Statham continued, his tone becoming more businesslike. "You 3 are going to apologize to this young man. Not because I'm telling you to, but because it's the right thing to do. And then you're going to leave him alone. Not just today, not just this week, permanently. Because if I hear that you continue this behavior, if I find out that you've made his life difficult in any way, I'll come back, and we'll have a much longer conversation about respect and consequences. Do we understand each other?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Trevor looked like he wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain that it had all been a joke or a misunderstanding. But under Statham's unwavering gaze, he found no words. Finally, he turned to Marcus and mumbled something that might have been an apology. Brad and Connor followed suit, their voices barely audible. Statham didn't seem satisfied, but he nodded curtly, accepting their weak offering. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He put his hand on Marcus's shoulder and said, Walk with me." Marcus Chen followed Jason Statham down the hallway in a state of surreal disbelief. The actor moved with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere he went, completely unbothered by the dozens of smartphones pointed in his direction or the whispers that followed their progress through the school. They walked past the cafeteria, past the gymnasium, and out through a side door that led to an empty courtyard usually reserved for CNAs during lunch period. The morning sun was bright, casting long shadows across the concrete benches and planted flower beds. Statham sat down on one of the benches and gestured for Marcus to join him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus clutched his chemistry textbook against his chest like a shield, his mind racing with questions he didn't know how to ask. "I bet you're wondering what I'm doing here," Statham finally said, turning to look at Marcus with those intense eyes that had stared down movie villains and real-world challenges alike. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak yet. His hands were still shaking from the adrenaline of the confrontation, from the shock of being rescued by someone famous, from the overwhelming strangeness of the entire situation. Statham leaned back against the bench, his posture relaxed but his attention completely focused on the teenager beside him. "I'm here because of a program I started 3 years ago," the actor explained. "It's called Stand Strong. We partner with schools in different cities, places where bullying has become a serious problem. We train teachers, we talk to students, we work with administrators to create better systems for protecting vulnerable kids. Your principal reached out to us 6 months ago. She was concerned about the culture here, about kids like you getting targeted. I'm here for the next 2 weeks, observing, talking to students, trying to understand what's really going on beneath the surface." He paused, studying Marcus's face carefully. "But I'll be honest with you, son, I wasn't planning to intervene directly. The program is supposed to work through existing structures, through education and awareness. What happened back there in the hallway? That was me breaking my own rules." Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Why did you?" Statham smiled slightly, and for a moment he looked less like an action hero and more like someone who understood pain and struggle on a personal level. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos until he found what he was looking for. He turned the screen toward Marcus. The image showed a young boy, maybe 12 or 13, with a black eye and a split lip. The kid was trying to smile for the camera, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. There was defeat there, a kind of weariness that no child should ever have to carry. "That's me at 13, Statham said quietly. "Taken the day after 3 older boys beat me up behind the school because my jacket was secondhand and my shoes had holes in them. My mom took that photo because she wanted evidence in case we went to the police. We never did. We couldn't afford to make waves, couldn't risk me getting expelled or causing trouble that might affect my dad's business. So I went back to school the next day, and the day after that, and I learned to fight back, not with my fists at first, but with my mind. I learned to be smart, to be strategic, to turn my circumstances into motivation rather than letting them destroy me." Marcus stared at the photo, trying to reconcile the vulnerable boy in the image with the powerful man sitting beside him. It seemed impossible that they were the same person. Statham pocketed his phone and continued speaking, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "When I saw you back there, pressed against those lockers with your broken shoe and your dignity hanging by a thread, I saw myself. And I couldn't walk past. I couldn't let you face that alone because I remember what alone feels like. I remember thinking that nobody cared, that nobody would ever stand up for me, that I was worthless because my family didn't have money. And I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, if I ever had a platform or influence or power, I would use it to protect kids who were going through what I went through." The word settled into Marcus's chest, warm and unexpected. For 8 months, he had convinced himself that he deserved the treatment he received, that poverty was somehow his fault, that being poor made him less worthy of respect or kindness. But here was Jason Statham, someone who had achieved incredible success, telling him that those beliefs were lies. Statham stood up from the bench and stretched, his movements fluid and controlled like a fighter staying loose between rounds. He looked down at Marcus with an expression that was both serious and encouraging. "Here's what I want you to understand," he said. "Your circumstances right now, they are temporary. The kids who are bullying you, they are temporary too. But the choices you make, the character you build, the strength you develop during difficult times, Those things are permanent. You can let this experience break you, or you can let it forge you into something stronger. I chose the second option. I took every insult, every beating, every moment of humiliation, and I turned it into fuel. I trained my body, I trained my mind, and I refused to accept that poverty defined my worth or limited my potential. Marcus felt something shift inside him, like a locked door suddenly swinging open. "How did you do it?" he asked. "How did you go from a kid in the photo to who you are now?" Statham sat back down, and this time his posture was more open, more willing to share the difficult truths that most successful people preferred to keep hidden. He told Marcus about the martial arts training he had started at 14, using money from a part-time job washing cars. He described the discipline he had learned, the way fighting taught him to control his emotions rather than being controlled by them. He talked about the rejections he faced when he first tried to break into acting, the doors that slammed in his face because he didn't have connections or formal training or the right accent. Every time someone told me no, every time someone said I wasn't good enough or polished enough or educated enough, I heard that 13-year-old kid crying in the bathroom after getting beat up, Statham said. And I made a choice. I could prove them right by giving up, or I could prove them wrong by working harder than everyone else. So that's what I did. I trained when I was exhausted. I studied when I wanted to sleep. I pushed myself beyond every limit I thought I had because I knew that talent without discipline is worthless, and dreams without action are just fantasies. He looked at Marcus with an intensity that made the teenager sit up straighter. You have a choice to make. Son, you can survive what's happening to you, or you can use it. You can let Trevor and kids like him define you, or you can define yourself. The path isn't easy. It requires dedication and sacrifice and stubbornness that borders on obsession. But it's possible. I'm living proof that it's possible. The bell for first period rang in the distance, a shrill sound that seemed disconnected from the profound conversation happening in the courtyard. Jason Statham stood and extended his hand to Marcus, pulling the boy to his feet with surprising gentleness. They walked back toward the main building together, but before they reached the door, the actor stopped and turned to face Marcus with an expression that was both challenging and supportive. The morning light caught the angles of his face, highlighting the scars and lines that told stories of a life fully lived, of battles fought and obstacles overcome. Marcus felt simultaneously intimidated and inspired, aware that he stood at a crossroad that would determine the trajectory of his entire future. "I'm going to make you an offer," Statham said, his voice taking on the tone of someone laying down terms for a serious agreement. "For the next 2 weeks while I'm here running this program, I want you to train with me. Not movie training, not fake Hollywood stuff. Real training. Combat disciplines, fitness conditioning, mental toughness exercises. I'll teach you what I learned over decades of martial art practice and professional fighting. But there are conditions." He held up one finger. "First, you show up every day at 5 in the morning at the gym 2 blocks from here. I've rented it for private sessions. You're late even once. The offer is rescinded. Second, you give me everything you've got. 100% effort. No excuses. No complaints. I don't care if you're tired or sore or frustrated. You push through. Third, you maintain your grades. I'll check with your teachers every 3 days. If your academic performance suffers because you're too focused on training, we stop immediately. Education is your foundation. Everything else builds on that." Marcus's mind reeled at the proposition. 5 in the morning meant he would need to wake up at 4 to catch the earliest bus. It meant less sleep, more exhaustion, pushing an already difficult life to its absolute limits. But as he looked into Statham's eyes, he saw something that transcended the physical challenges being described. This was about more than learning to throw punches or build muscles. This was about transformation, about becoming someone different than the invisible boy who walked through hallways hoping not to be noticed. This was about claiming power over his own narrative instead of letting others write it for him. "I'll do it," Marcus said, and his voice came out stronger than he expected. Statham smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face from stern to approving. He clapped Marcus on the shoulder with a force that nearly knocked the teenager off balance. They entered the school building together, and Marcus immediately felt the difference. Students who had witnessed a hallway confrontation stared at him with new expressions. Some looked curious, others respectful, a few seemed envious. Trevor Blackwood stood near the water fountain with Brad and Connor, and when Marcus walked past with Jason Statham, the bully's eyes dropped to the floor. The power dynamic had shifted in a way that everyone could sense but couldn't quite articulate. That afternoon, Marcus went home to the apartment he shared with his mother in a building that smelled like old cooking oil and mildew. He found her in the kitchen, still wearing her hospital scrubs, preparing dinner with ingredients that had been carefully budgeted to last a week. When he told her about what had happened, about Jason Statham and the training offer, she stopped chopping vegetables and looked at him with tears in her eyes. Maria Chen was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with hands that showed the evidence of hard labor and a face that had aged before its time. But her eyes were fierce with love and determination. "You do this," she said in her accented English, pointing at him with a knife still in her hand. "You work hard, you make yourself strong. Not just body strong, mind strong, heart strong. Your father, he gave up when things got difficult. He ran away when you were a baby. But you and me, we don't run. We fight." She came around the counter and took his face in her rough hands, looking at him with an intensity that matched Statham's. "I clean toilets so you can have education, so you can have chance I never had. You think I don't know kids make fun of you? You think I don't hear you crying at night when you think I'm asleep? I know everything, and I work harder because I know. Now you have chance to learn from someone strong, someone who understands. You take it, you grab it with both hands, and you don't let go." That night, Marcus set his alarm for 4 a.m. He laid out the cleanest clothes he owned, the ones his mother had washed by hand and hung to dry on the apartment's tiny balcony. He tried to sleep, but his mind raced with possibilities and fears in equal measure. What if he couldn't handle the training? What if he embarrassed himself in front of Jason Statham? What if he was too weak, too soft, too broken to become someone strong? The doubts circled like vultures, picking at his confidence until he wanted to turn off the alarm and forget the whole thing. But then he remembered Statham's words. You can survive what's happening to you, or you can use it. Marcus chose to use it. When the alarm shattered the pre-dawn silence, Marcus was already awake. He dressed quickly in the dark, trying not to wake his mother who had only gotten home from her second job 3 hours earlier. He left a note on the kitchen table. "Gone to train with Mr. Statham. We'll be home after school. Love you." And slipped out into the empty streets. The city was different at 4:30 in the morning. The usual chaos of traffic and crowds had been replaced by an eerie stillness broken only by the occasional taxi or early morning worker. Marcus walked the 2 blocks to the gym Statham had mentioned, his broken shoe flapping against the sidewalk in rhythm with his nervous heartbeat. The gym was a no-frill facility sandwiched between a laundromat and a pawn shop. Through the large front windows, Marcus could see Statham inside, already warming up with jump rope that whistled through the air in a blur of motion. The actor's movements were precise and economical, every rotation of the rope controlled and purposeful. When he saw Marcus approaching, he stopped and checked his watch. 4:58. Marcus was 2 minutes early. Statham nodded in approval and opened the door, the scent of rubber mats and old sweat washing over Marcus like a baptism into a new world. This was it. This was where everything changed. Marcus stepped across the threshold, leaving behind the boy who had cowered against lockers, stepping toward whoever he was about to become. The first morning nearly killed him. Jason Statham didn't believe in gentle introductions or gradual progressions. He believed in throwing people into deep water and seeing if they could swim. Marcus spent 2 hours moving through exercises that left every muscle screaming and his lungs burning like he had inhaled fire. Burpees, mountain climbers, sprawls, bear crawls, and dozens of other movements with names Marcus couldn't remember because his brain had stopped functioning somewhere around the 40-minute mark. When he thought it was over, Statham introduced him to the heavy bag, teaching him basic punches with a patience that contrasted sharply with the brutal workout that had preceded it. By the time Marcus stumbled out of the gym at 7:15, he barely had enough energy to make it to school. But he went. And the next morning, when his alarm went off and every part of his body protested the very idea of movement, he went again. And again. And again. Each day, Statham pushed him a little further, demanding more effort, more focus, more determination. The actor rarely offered praise, but his corrections were educational rather than demeaning. He explained the mechanics of movement, the physics of power generation, the mental aspect of fighting that had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with control. Between exercises, during brief water breaks, Statham shared stories from his own life, not as motivational speeches but as honest accounts of failure and persistence. "I auditioned for a role once that I thought would change my career," Statham told him on the fifth morning, as they both recovered from a particularly brutal sparring session. "Big action film, perfect for what I could do. I trained for weeks to prepare. I walked into that audition feeling confident, ready to show them what I had. They took one look at me and said I didn't have the right look. Too rough, they said. Too street. They wanted someone more polished, more traditionally handsome. I left that audition feeling like I had wasted my time, like maybe I should give up and find a normal job." He took a long drink of water and continued. 2 years later, I got a call about a different film. The director had seen my audition tape from that rejection and thought I was perfect for a role that eventually became my breakthrough. If I had given up after that first rejection, if I had believed them when they said I wasn't right, I wouldn't be here today. The lesson is simple. Other people's opinions of you are irrelevant. The only opinion that matters is your own. At school, Marcus noticed changes. The most obvious was physical. His body was responding to the intense training with adaptations that surprised him. Muscles he didn't know he had began to define themselves under his skin. His posture improved. His movement became more confident. His presence in hallways and classrooms subtly shifted from invisible to visible. But the more profound changes were internal. When Trevor Black would pass him in the corridor now, Marcus didn't look away. He met the bully's eyes steadily, not with aggression but with calm certainty. Trevor always looked away first. The power dynamic had completely reversed, and everyone sensed it. On the 9th day of training, something remarkable happened. Marcus was working the heavy bag, throwing combinations that Statham had drilled into him through countless repetitions, when the actor suddenly stopped him mid-punch. Again, Statham said, "Same combination. But this time, I want you to feel it differently. You're still throwing punches like you're asking permission, like you're apologizing for taking up space. I want you to throw them like you own the space, like you have every right to be here, to be strong, to be powerful. Not angry, not violent. Just certain. Do it again." Marcus reset his stance, took a breath, and threw the combination. This time something clicked. The punches came from a deeper place, from the part of him that his mother had called heartstrong. The bag responded differently to his strikes, moving with more authority, making sounds that spoke of genuine power. When he finished, breathing hard but feeling electric, Statham was smiling. "There it is," the actor said. "That's what I've been waiting to see. You just stopped being a victim and became a fighter. Not because you want to hurt anyone, but because you finally understand your own worth. Remember this feeling. This is who you really are." The 2 weeks passed faster than Marcus thought possible. On the final morning of training, Statham had him demonstrate everything he had learned, moving through combinations and defensive techniques with a fluidity that would have seemed impossible 14 days earlier. When they finished, both drenched in sweat and breathing hard, the actor sat Marcus down for their last conversation. The gym was quiet except for their breathing and the hum of the fluorescent lights above. Statham's expression was serious but warm, the look of a teacher watching a student prepare to walk their own path. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Statham said. "The program moves to another city, another school with kids who need what we're trying to provide. But before I go, I need to tell you something important. What you've learned in these 2 weeks, it's not the end of anything. It's the beginning. The real challenge starts now, when I'm not here to push you, when you have to find motivation in yourself rather than in my expectations. You will be tempted to stop training, to slide back into old patterns, to forget what you discovered about your own strength. Don't let that happen." Marcus felt emotion rising in his throat, threatening to spill out his tears. This man, this famous actor who owed him nothing, had given him something more valuable than any material gift. Statham had given him belief in himself, tools to build a different future, and proof that transformation was possible for anyone willing to work for it. "I won't stop," Marcus promised. "I'll keep training. I'll keep pushing myself. I'll make you proud." Statham shook his head gently. "Don't make me proud," he said. "Make yourself proud. That's the only thing that matters." I'm just some guy who saw a kid who reminded him of himself. I'll forget your name in a few months, move on to other cities and other students. That's the truth of it. But you? You have to live with yourself every single day for the rest of your life. So become someone you respect. Become someone your mother can be proud of, not because of what you achieve, but because of who you are. That's the real victory. They shook hands, and Marcus felt the calluses on Statham's palm, the physical evidence of decades of training and discipline. Then the actor did something unexpected. He reached into his gym bag and pulled out a pair of brand new training shoes, proper ones with good support and no holes. "These are for you," he said, handing them to Marcus. "Not charity. Payment for being a good student and working harder than I expected. You earned them." Marcus took the shoes, feeling their weight and quality, understanding that they represented more than footwear. They represented transition, the movement from one version of himself to another. 6 months later, Marcus Chen walked through the hallways of Lincoln High School with his head up and his shoulders back. He wore the shoes Statham had given him, now broken and uncomfortable. His grades had improved dramatically. He was now pulling straight A's and had caught the attention of college recruiters interested in students who overcame adversity. He had continued training at the gym, finding a part-time job washing dishes to pay for membership and private lessons with a coach who had worked with Statham years earlier. The broken shoe that had once announced his poverty with every step was gone, but Marcus kept it in his closet as a reminder of where he had started. Trevor Blackwood had transferred to a private school, unable to handle the shift in social dynamics that occurred after the confrontation with Statham. But even if he had stayed, Marcus knew it wouldn't have mattered. The boy who could be bullied no longer existed. He had been replaced by someone who understood that strength wasn't about dominating others. It was about refusing to be dominated. Marcus had learned that poverty was a circumstance, not an identity, and that character forged in difficult times was the most valuable asset anyone could possess. As he walked past his old locker, past the spot where everything had changed, Marcus smiled. Not because his life was perfect. It wasn't. But because he finally understood that he had the power to shape his own story. And that made all the difference.